In this video, I'm going to go over the basics of how to start animating and work with the motion timeline inside Photoshop. So I need to first change my workspace. And so far we've been working in Essentials, and I'm going to switch to Motion. You can also get to the workspaces by going to Window and Motion at the top. And when you do that, you'll see that it has opened up a area for the timeline down here. That's the biggest change. And you have two options. The options between video timeline and frame animation. I'm going to mainly be covering video timeline in this project because it applies much more widely to working with video in programs like After Effects and Premiere. Frame animation is amazing. It's different. There's a ton of resources online. If you want to go down that direction, I'm fine with that. But for the purposes of our class, I'm going to stick to the video timeline. To create a space to create motion, you're then going to do create video timeline. And I'm going to zoom out my image so I can see it here. And you'll see that it has created a specific length of time going from 0 seconds to 1 second to 2 seconds, all the way up until 5 seconds. And I know I'm at 5 seconds because it is showing me this interesting number down here, 429. Now what this is saying is 4 and 29 frames, 4 seconds and 29 frames. And I know that because it's 30 frames per second. And to zoom into my timeline, I'm going to zoom in down here, and you'll see this last frame is at 5 seconds. This is our work area. So if I zoom back out, I will see that if I only want my animation to be 1 second long, I can shrink this down to 1 second and press play, and it'll only go for 1 second. You'll notice down here that it's not playing back at the correct rendered speed. Sometimes you need to let this render and actually run a couple times or run once, and you'll see this blue bar go underneath to see it play back and at whatever frame rate you have it set to. And we're going to stick to 30 frames per second, just the default for this project. Now, what you can do is, I'm going to stretch this back out to 5. You can change where your layer starts and stops. So if I have this cat start at 1 second, that means for 1 second of time, we're not going to see it. If I then shrink it down and I'm just clicking and dragging on the edge, it'll only stay on the screen for 1 second. I could also reposition this. If I duplicate this layer by holding down Option or Alt and clicking and dragging, you'll see that it duplicates it at the same type of format that it had. But if I duplicate it by doing Command J or Control J, notice that it does it at a longer set of time. It sets it back to the default, which is 5 seconds long for a layer. But if I do the Option drag, notice that I can have these separated out. I could put these on the same layer next to each other. You've got a lot of control over where you want these to start and stop when I press play. And pressing play by pressing the space bar, that'll be on screen for 1 second, then disappear, then come back on. So you have control around when things start and stop. But where the really interesting thing starts to come in is, what if I want, and I'm going to turn the visibility of this bottom layer back on. What if I want to actually animate this? What if I want my thing to move? What I can do is set keyframes. And keyframes are a way of setting key points in your animation of where you want action to happen and letting the computer or letting the program interpolate between those points of action. By interpolate, I mean create actual images of movement between those 2 points. To activate this, or to start this, I need to first click on the stopwatch, which means enable keyframe animation. So I'm going to click and then move forward in time. So I'm going to move the blue playhead forward in time to 1 second, and I'm going to change the position of my cat, and I'm going to move it up. And you notice that when I make a change, it's going to create another diamond or another keyframe right where I had my blue playhead positioned. So when I scrub back in time and I press play, it's going to move up. You'll notice that the resolution goes down, and that's because I have the option for resolution to be set to 25% when it plays. If I want it to be 100% to see what it really looks like, I can press play. Notice that it's not playing back at full speed. So I usually keep this set to the lowest, and I have loop playback set on so that way I can see when it gets to the end and I press play, it'll come back to the beginning. Now, if I want to slow this down, I can click on the second keyframe here and move it away from the first one. So it takes longer between these two keyframes for the action to occur. And if I want to speed up, I drag this second keyframe closer to the first one. So it'll move up much more quickly. And I can drag it right next to it. And if I want to zoom in, it might be a little bit easier to see those keyframes closer together. So if I really want it to move quickly, I can put it 2 frames apart and you'll see that it jumps up right away. Boop. You almost can't even see that sort of movement, so I might slide it out just a little bit more. Now, what I can do is I could also have movement happen between these points. So anytime I move this, so if I move it off the screen over here, notice that it's also created another keyframe. So it's going to jump over here and then jump back up to this top one. So once you set the keyframe or you initialize it, you don't need to press this stopwatch again. If I do, it erases all my keyframes. And so this is something to watch out for, that once you initialize your keyframe, jump forward in time, move it, or if you go to edit and free transform, then you also have the ability to scale it. So I might position it right here. And so this is going to scale up. That's pretty good. Scale up. Or if I want it to then rotate, I can also do Command T and rotate it around and holding down Shift and rotating. Let's put it up at the top. So you'll see, and rotating is a little weird in Photoshop. I'm going to be honest and say that it's a little bit trickier than you might expect. There we go. So I think even though I rotate it the other way, it still went up this way. So if I want that to be a little bit smoother, I can spread this out. And we also have options to change the opacity. So if I want this to change in opacity, I'm going to initialize a keyframe, jump forward in time, change this to 0. And notice it creates a keyframe and it disappears as it gets here. And then I could have it come back inside there. So it's going to fade out and fade in. And I'm going to zoom back out here. And you see that I'm starting to build up my set of keyframes inside here. Style is when you double click on your keyframe, or I'm going to initialize it first so it starts out blank. If you want to double click on your layer, and I'm going to double click on the actual text itself, and I'm going to double click on the, not on the text, but on the layer itself, you'll see this layer style option come up. And so say I wanted to add a stroke around the outside, I can click stroke and make sure you actually click on here to see it affected. And now I'm going to add a stroke. I can change the color. Cool. And then I say okay. And notice that it's created a keyframe there. So it starts out without one and then one is added on. This is a little trickier, the style one to work with, and you see that stroke is now off again. I can have it blink back on. So that's actually going to work kind of interesting. So you can add in this, and I might get rid of my opacity keyframes because I find that's a little distracting. Let's play this back. And it is doing that sort of like subtle shaking there just because the resolution that was working there. But once we export it, you won't see that there anymore.